It's a coincidence of the calendar, the stark contrast between two Mideast neighbors in flux. The long-announced first visit by a Western head of state to post-Assad Syria as Emmanuel Macron in Damascus, just as Iran's in the midst of the week-long funeral procession for its slain supreme leader. We'll ask about the French president's trip to a nation that long, long ago was once a French protectorate, about Macron's host, Ahmed al-Sharaa, who's gone from jihadist rebel leader to friend of the Trump administration, and whether they're paying mind over the border as Khamenei's procession travels to various Shia pilgrimage sites in Iran and Iraq. Back in February, when the U.S. and Israel decided to strike, the region had already been in the throes of a shift in influence, what with Iran's proxies diminished in Gaza and Lebanon, and of course the fall of Assad in Syria. As last week's visit to Lebanon by Syria's foreign minister illustrates, it's much more than Damascus that's at stake here. Beyond business deals and reconstruction, there's an entire region crying out for an end to a decade and a half of conflict so it can begin the healing process. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking what's behind Macron's Syrian stopover. With us from Bordeaux, Franco-Syrian journalist Lina Shawaf, professor at Tufts University in the United States. Thanks for being with us.
Hello, hi.
Not from Granville in Normandy, but from Granville, Vermont, Joshua Landis, director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma, editor of SyriaComment.com. Good to see you.
Pleasure.
From New York, Arash Azizi, contributing writer to The Atlantic magazine, the author of What Iranians Want, Women, Life, Freedom. Good to see you.
It's great to see you.
And we welcome back Rina Bassiste, correspondent for Al Monitor. How are you?
Good evening, Francois. Nice to be here.
On the go, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. That's a reminder. Now, for Emmanuel Macron, it's a brief stopover on his way to the NATO summit in neighboring Turkey. For neighboring Iran, it's 7 days of memorializing its assassinated leader. And after the lying in state, let's begin with Iran and the procession making its way through the capital before a journey that will take Ayatollah Ali Khamenei to his final resting place Thursday at the Imam Reza shrine in his native Mashhad. The foreign press has been invited in for the occasion. From Tehran correspondent Reza Sayeh.
On Tehran's Revolution Avenue, a sea of mourners said their final farewell to the leader many here say gave his life to protect Iran's revolution. Monday's funeral procession for Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was the culmination of a 3-day ceremony in the capital Tehran, where masses of supporters paid their respect to the man who led Iran for 37 years and died at the hands of what he called the imperialist enemies of Iran. Samira Afshari traveled here for 8 hours by bus from the city of Esfahan. The 34-year-old neurologist says her admiration started early.
His resilience, his words, his character. The older I got, the more I learned and the more I loved him.
Critics and opponents of the late Supreme Leader long claimed that he didn't have widespread support, that there were more opponents than supporters. Well, his supporters point to this crowd, to this gathering, to say those critics were wrong and that they underestimated the strength and the resiliency of the Islamic Republic. They underestimated the support for the Supreme Leader.
At a makeshift souvenir stand, Ali Reza sold pictures and keepsakes glorifying the slain leader. He says critics of the Supreme Leader have a right to question his policies, but how he was portrayed was not who he was.
The news all over the world claimed that the Islamic Republic is not for the people, that the people are against the leadership, that the leader was a dictator. It is not at all like this. We really loved him. We still love him. That's why we're here.
The admiration for the slain leader was accompanied by calls for revenge, a message to the United States and Israel that Ayatollah Khamenei may be gone, but the millions who support him still stand, determined to continue his fight.
Arash Azizi, there's been a lot of positive spin put in by the regime when it comes to this 7 days of processions and official mourning. If you take a step backwards, you as a historian, how does this compare with the death of Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989?
This is a very good question to ask, because the contrast couldn't be clearer, actually. In 1989, you really had an outpouring of very genuine emotions on part of millions of Iranians, many of whom remembered the 1979 revolution, which Khomeini had just led. His authority didn't come from being a head of a state who made daily decisions, really. He was seen as like a prophetic figure who had led a revolution. And even when people had discontent, they didn't really put it to Khomeini, because Khomeini didn't actually intervene that much into the day-to-day affairs of the country. He did in some important occasions. Ayatollah Khamenei led a bureaucratized, militarized regime for close to 4 decades without any accountability. He never gave media interviews, and yet it was clear that he calls the final shots. He repeatedly sidelined his colleagues who wanted a different path. And so I don't see any sort of course, there is a hardcore to the regime who support him, and his numbers in millions, by the way, and they showed up. There are also others who I think were just unhappy that the US and Israel had killed the Iranian head of a state. There are others who had time for him. They praised him in some way or the other, but you don't have anything like the massive outpouring that you had in 1989, and it was much more sort of grassroots. And of course, the bigger question in all this funeral is that, this is a funeral in which a performer calls for the death of the Trump, in which they are shouting things against the MOU, in which they want to show that they really will continue Khamenei's policies. And yet, these policies are entirely untenable. And the regime leadership knows that, which is why it signed the MOU. So I don't think the flavor of Iran in the months and years to come will be like it was seen in this funeral.
Rina Bassist, your thoughts again on this? It started on Friday. Today's Monday. It's going to run all the way to Thursday.
Absolutely. I mean, the scenario that the regime in Tehran is trying to sell to the people, it's a complicated one. Because, of course, the first thing that they want is to put aside, nobody talks about, it's forgotten, it never existed, that their supreme leader, the one that should have been the most protected person in Iran, was killed by the Israelis and the Americans on a first try, if you want. There was an opportunity, the opportunity was seized, and that's it. He's dead. So that's something nobody is talking about, because, of course, it's an enormous, enormous failure on the part of the Tehran regime. On the other hand, what do they want to project? They want to project first, we won against the Americans. Look at us. We are all walking, all the Iranian leadership, those left, those who were not killed, they're in the streets. The president, all the chiefs of the Revolutionary Guards, everybody's outside. Nobody can touch us because we are victorious. That's one thing that they want to show. And then the other thing is to show the world, or to claim to the world, that the Iranian people support the regime, that they are all in the streets, they are all weeping. And we go back exactly to what my colleague spoke about, the issue of grassroots, because obviously it's not the situation. I mean, people might be sad that the leader was killed, but do they know exactly what happened? How much did the regime tell them? How much did the regime allow the internet to tell them? We don't know exactly. So it's very important for the regime to show this picture of all the leaders outside, fearless, all the people coming to this Friday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday procession until his final burial. It's a sort of message that the Iranians are trying to send to the world, but of course, the more they try, the less credible it seems.
Joshua Landis, if you compare December 2024, the fall of Bashar al-Assad, the house of Assad, his father had been the leader of Syria before him, to February the 28th, the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei, the regime is still there. How much are these, which is the more seminal moment, if you will?
Well, it's very clear that the Arab regimes, whether it's in Iraq or Syria or Libya, were very fragile compared to the Iranian regime. And this is what Trump completely misunderstood, and the Americans and Israelis misunderstood, that there is still popular backing. Even if it's a minority of Iranians, there is a powerful regime that could replenish itself and stand up to the United States bombing. And that's a big difference. Iran is a nation, anyway, that has much more cohesion than the Arabs do.
Joshua, we're going to try to reconnect with you because we're having audio issues dipping in and out. But we heard what you said. Lina Shawaf, you agree with that? That there's a big difference between Iran and Syria in that respect?
You mean between each other?
Just in terms of the state apparatus being more strong in Iran than it is in Syria.
Yeah. Actually, it's very clear, or it's very like expectable that a new psycho will coming soon in the whole area, as you see, since as you said, like the fall of Bachar Al-Assad in Syria, and then in February, like the killing and like in Iran, and even Hezbollah in Lebanon, killing all this like first level of military Hezbollah leader. So it's very clear that a new deal will happen in Syria. I was always saying in the last 14 years, during the Syrian revolution or during the Syrian war, after the beginning of revolution 2011, it became a war. And I always was saying, this is a war in Syria, like all the big countries fighting there, and like the Syrian people who pay the price inside Syria.
Right. So a bit of a proxy war taking place. And it's interesting because that was sort of the label that had been put for years on neighboring Lebanon. Last Thursday, Syria dispatched its foreign minister to Lebanon, Syria, which for years occupied the country. That was the place where proxy wars took place before. And Lebanon had sent its fighters, as you say, after 2011, in the other direction to prop up Assad. The foreign minister, Assad al-Shabani, meeting with the parliament speaker, Nabi Berri, whose party is aligned with Hezbollah.
Today there's no meeting with Hezbollah. However, if there's a shared interest, we are certainly open to it.
Certainly open to it. I don't know if that was politeness, Lina Shawaf, or if he actually meant it.
As we saw, like even the President Ahmed he was in Paris. He was like the first visit to Europe was in Paris, and I think if we read all the political talk of the Syrian government, the new or the transition Syrian government, we can see that they are open to forget everything, but at the same time, they want the balance. If they were asking to interfere in Lebanon, but it's different between USA and Europe.
Right.
So I think there is condition for the government if they want to interfere in Lebanon.
Yeah, there was this rock star welcome, Rina Bassist, for the foreign minister when he went to the Lebanese Sunni stronghold of Tripoli during that visit.
Yeah, I think this whole visit, we have heard just a few days ago this comment by American President Donald Trump, who said if Israel, they don't manage to deal with Hezbollah, maybe the Syrians can do it instead of them. And this rattled, I think, of course, Israel first, but also Syria, because Ahmed al-Sharaa was very quick to say, no, it's not our intention. We're not going to go inside Lebanon. I mean, he has his own problems, first of all. The problem of Hezbollah is an enormous one, and I'm not sure that he wants this big problem on his shoulders. And I think this visit was in a way to reassure the Lebanese government, to say we are not going to invade Lebanon just to deal with Hezbollah. You are the responsible people. You are the one responsible for the sovereignty of Lebanon. And we have to add to that also the war reports 2 or 3 months ago about Syrian forces demining areas near the border between Syria and Lebanon. And of course, the first interpretation of that is when you demine an area near the border is that you intend to invade. You are clearing the path. So there are a lot of signs that worry the government in Beirut. They are worried that al-Sharaa will take some sort of an initiative to join this campaign against Hezbollah. And here the Syrians are saying, absolutely not. We are even open to talk with Hezbollah. I'm not sure they are going to do that. But the fact that they are saying that, it's sending, I think, a very clear message. Hezbollah, at the end of the day, it's the problem of the government in Beirut.
Joshua Landis, do you agree?
Yes. Syria is in no position to enter into Lebanon. Its military is really very disorganized and full of irregular troops. President Trump really said that in order to send a message to the Israelis. We don't trust you. He reversed their narrative on Lebanon and said, you're incompetent. Even Syria is better than you. This was President Trump, doing his regular thing. And I don't think anybody took it very seriously in the neighborhood. But Lebanon, of course, was made anxious. Certainly the Christian Lebanese were made anxious because there's a long history of Syria intervening in Lebanon. And Lebanon is extremely weak today. And so any statement of this kind, of course, sends a frisson down the spine of Lebanese.
Arash Azizi, we talked earlier about where the proxies meet for regional powers, again, with the sands shifting throughout the region. How's it looking on that score when you look at Lebanon, when you look at Syria today?
Well, the axis of resistance of Iran has been weakened. Iran is going to have serious troubles as it looks to its future as to how it wants to define its relationship to this axis and to the different militias it controls. You see, as I said, it's wanting to shout death to America and all that. But the question is, what do you actually do in different countries? We haven't talked about Iraq, of course, which is an important site of now effective battles. There. Between forces that traditionally support Iran and those that want to see a different governance in Iraq. And in Lebanon, of course, Hezbollah is entirely marginalized. Now you have a government that is very much dedicated to opposing it and perhaps even disarming it and has reached a separate deal with Israel, although in practice it would be harder to implement, of course, and Iran can always try to play the spoiler. And in Syria, of course, we have a sovereign government that is very different. So the future of Iran's influence in the region looks quite different than it did in the past. And also faces Iran as it tries to plot the next era of its history with a different question, basically, which is, what it is going to do. Does it want to adopt good neighborliness policies with Arab countries and others, or continue to support its militias? Or something in between. I mean, I'm not naive. Iran will try to have its influence in one way or the other. But will it put the emphasis on trying to effectively export its revolution to these countries and further its influence using these militias, or put an emphasis on a state-to-state relations with Sharaa in Syria, with other governments in the region. And I think they might come to see that the latter is in their own benefit and adopt that path instead.
Even though, so let me ask you then, because we've seen, again, since the beginning of this state funeral last Friday, we've seen some people front and center, including we saw images on Iranian state television of the head of the Revolutionary Guards, Ahmed Vahidi. Does that signal that they're going to take the pragmatic approach that you're talking about? Or is it going to be as ideological as it was in the past?
Whatever path they take has nothing to do with Vahidi being there or not. The idea that the IRGC is a sort of ideological body opposed to the pragmatic sections there, which is, sometimes is said, in my humble opinion, it's entirely wrong-headed. I think IRGC, it's not as a whole, its different sections is not an ideological sort of political party the way it has sometimes been in its history, but it's rather decentralized networks of different security bodies which have their own interests, and these interests means that they will be much more interested in, under certain circumstances, they'll be much more interested in normalizing with the West, or anyways, going away from Ayatollah Khamenei's kind of ideological Islamism. So Vahidi being there doesn't change that. It's also true that, of course, all the leaders of these militias were there, and the regime is really invested in this idea that it's the head of the axis of resistance and all that. We need to see how it can shift from that. If you look at, for example, if you look at Soviet Union, of course, one of the first things Gorbachev did at some point was to quit the Soviet forces from Afghanistan, but also reduce help to Vietnam and others. But of course, that he was also a reformist and a Democrat, and that also led to a very cautionary tale. So the Islamic Republic would be very concerned as to how they would wind down these policies, how they'll move to a new era without experiencing collapse. And they will look at experiences like Gorbachev, actually. And they'll probably try to reinvent, for example, Iran could maintain its influence in Lebanon in different ways, by a different relationship to Amal, perhaps, and by a different relationship to Hezbollah. It could also do so in other countries, but it will find out that the height of Khomeinism, that kind of sectarian ideological policies, would be harder to carry out in the new Middle East, especially if they want to be on better terms. Look at the Iran-Saudi process, for example. Iran has wanted to reconcile with Saudi Arabia for a long time. This is an obstacle from the very beginning. If you remember, when Iran and Saudi foreign minister had a joint press conference, Iran didn't like that. Saudis didn't like that there was a picture of Qasem Soleimani behind them, so they left the room. And this happened a few other times, right? It's just a symbolic way of saying Iran needs to decide. Does it want to be a powerful country that has relations with Saudis and others, Egyptians and others in the region? Or does it want to be forever a revisionist revolutionary actor that intervenes in the lives of Arab countries in that direct way?
There's lots of players scrambling in all of this, Rina Basista, because, and we've talked about it ever since December of 2024 and the fall of Assad. There's the powers in the region are what? Iran, Turkey, and Israel, of course, which has increased its position inside of the Golan Heights since and beyond, sort of the so-called buffer zone after the fall of Assad. So, again, is that what is the future unwritten, or is it forever going to be this permanent state of tension between rivals that kind of switch allegiances?
I mean, there have been, over the years, there have been negotiations between Israel and Syria. That happened in the past under the Assad regime, and it could happen again. And we see there were some attempts over the past, since December 2024, when the Assad regime fell. There were attempts pushed by the Americans for Israeli-Syrian negotiations. For the moment, these attempts didn't bring much. We don't see, first of all, Israel is not ready to compromise on withdrawing from the positions it took for the moment without very, very solid guarantees on the part of the Americans, obviously, about the intentions of Ahmed al-Sharaa. In Israel, there is very little trust in him, despite the enormous enthusiasm on the part of President Donald Trump and also on the part of President Emmanuel Macron vis-a-vis the new Syrian president.
Yeah.
Israel does not share this enthusiasm. There is a lot of mistrust. So, a deal between the two countries, that's far away, I think.
All right, let's talk about Emmanuel Macron in Damascus. But first, it follows the fact that last Thursday, before his arrival, there was this attack targeting a cafe in the capital that's a favored hangout of lawyers across the street from Damascus Central Courts. 10 killed, the homemade device packed with metal fragments.
We demand stronger security and firm control over the country. The state must deal with this with an iron fist. There is no room for the negligence and recklessness we are seeing today. Unfortunately, there are hidden hands behind what's happening.
So, Lina Chawaf, who done it? Was it some kind of foreign power behind it? Was it criminal elements? Was it ISIS? Who's behind this?
I think it's a message after, like, the foreign minister in the transition government, like they release and they even talk about they are open to, like, to negotiate, as Rina said, and to really participate in political balance distribution in the area. So I think it's a message, but I cannot accuse any, like, party or any country, because this is the work of the government. They have to discover who, but I think it's a message from some party, some like militia or some country who are not agree with this line of the foreign minister, like in Syria, in the transition government.
And there's no claim of responsibility, Joshua Landis.
Well, no, we don't know who it is yet, but there has been a series of attacks on government troops by rather nebulous Islamist groups that claim that the president has been too compromising, that he's too close to the United States, and that he's abandoning Islamic precepts. So we've seen that with an attack on a Christian church, attack on government forces in Tedmod, and this sort of attack is, reminds us of that. So it underlines how fragile the country still remains and how divided it remains.
When Joshua, let me ask you about this, Joshua, because when you heard about this bomb blast last Thursday, did you think perhaps that Emmanuel Macron might not come to Damascus?
Well, it could have been directed towards him. And the thing is, there is a power vacuum in the region, and the region is very unsettled. But this is why Macron is going to Syria. The Russians have largely withdrawn their troops. They're trying to get a foothold back in. The Americans have withdrawn all of their troops. This is a moment for France to swing in and embrace Sharaa, as it has done early in the previous campaigns, and to bring 40 members of the CAC 40, the big firms in France, to help with the ports, which they've been already involved with. The big oil company, Total, is there to look at what they can do, and also the aircraft. So to reestablish routes and airplanes and security with Syrian air. So France is not only economically trying to take a bigger role, but militarily it's trying to take a bigger role. And there's been some talk about Khomeini and other bases, Russian bases, being opened up to the French. So this is a moment where France can reestablish itself in the Levant. It's been doing the same politics in Lebanon, going early after disasters. And we're seeing the same thing here in Syria.
All right. No, I was just going to say, you mentioned, both Syria and Lebanon, the Levant, former French protectorates long ago. You mentioned Joshua Landis, those French business leaders in tow. Among those who have the ear of the French president is shipping magnate Rodolphe Saadé. His CMA-CGM company in May last year bagged a 30-year agreement with Syria to modernize the port of Latakia. There's something about Emmanuel Macron and Rodolphe Saadé, Rina Bassiste. What is it?
There is that, but there is also the port of Latakia, which is not only an economic important element for Mr. Saadé, but it's also an enormously important strategic area. And we know there have been these military bases based over there. So it's two birds with one stone, if you want, for President Macron. And I think the fact that Mr. Saadé has such an important investment or engagement vis-à-vis Syria, I mean, Macron is playing that to the end of it. He's exploiting it as much as he can. And I think the person that spoke before me was very correct. I mean, Macron is trying, on the one hand, there is naturally the economic side. I mean, the country is ruined. There is a lot of business to do, a lot of reconstruction to do. And President Macron wants France to be inside. But more than that, on the diplomatic level, look at it. Iran, the French are outside. This whole idea of the French accompanying boats, opening the Strait of Hormuz, for the moment, the Americans and the Iranians are not interested. Lebanon, all these pilot projects with the Israelis. Supposedly, the French should have been inside helping the Lebanese military to train. They're out of it. It's American forces that are going to accompany them. Gaza, the French are outside of the Peace Council. So it leaves France only with Syria. This is where they are going to put their money, to put their diplomatic efforts, to use everything that Mr. Saadé can afford.
Yeah, Lina Shawaf, when it comes to Rodolphe Saadé, is it business in the interest of politics or politics in the interest of business?
Both sides, I think, and it's not only politics and business, it's economically and safety. And we have to remember that France, from the first country who started to support the Syrian revolution from 2011, and we know that a lot of artists, activists, journalists went to, was accepted by France a long time ago. And we have to remember that first radio, that I created, Rosanna Radio in France, it was started 2013. It is supported by the French government and is still working till now. And French government supporting not only Rosanna Radio, they are supporting many independent Syrian media working from France, acting from France. Now it's changing after Assad, but I mean, it's supported. And I agree with Syria now, it's on the brink, we can say. It's not still not. We have to remember that the EU in May, I think, they announced that Syria is still not so safe to go back for the refugee and immigrant. So I always say we're still on in Syria, in a situation we have to be careful, but all the people want to do something. So Syria on the brink still.
Arash Azizi, what do you make of this visit by Emmanuel Macron? Again, this stopover in Damascus, it had been in the works for a while, but still it's happening on the eve of Macron flying on to Ankara to meet Donald Trump and the others for that NATO summit.
President al-Sharaa is showing a very different mode of a post-revolutionary leadership to the region. And frankly, this will have its effect on Iranians and Iran. He's showing, let us forget, he hasn't just welcomed President Macron. He's gone to Russia. He's broke bread with President Putin, the very man who helped kill hundreds of thousands of his compatriots and comrades in this long war that he had. So he's shown that he wants Syria to be non-aligned, to have good relations with as many countries that it can, that it has no hostility to Israel. He wants to show no hostility to Iran. He doesn't want Syria to go meddle in Lebanon and take on Hezbollah, as the other guests pointed out. And he wants good relations with both the United States
As Lena was saying, it's not about him, but about a country that's been in ruins in parts because of the uprising that turned into a civil war all the way back in 2011. You've had also those forced out of neighboring countries like Turkey and Lebanon, who have returned since December of 2024. The needs are huge. According to the International Rescue Committee, 4.1 million Syrians don't have proper housing. And here you can see where people have come in from in the past couple of years, according to IRC. Now, what Ahmed al-Sharaa has been able to do, to a degree, is consolidate his power, particularly if you look at that map, at the northern part, when it comes to areas that were controlled by the Kurds. And it'll be interesting to hear, if you're a fly on the wall, what's said between Emmanuel Macron and the Syrian leader. France, which has been traditionally supportive of the Kurdish people, spread out not just in Syria, but also in Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. The Kurds, until very recently, also had the support of the U.S. in the fight against ISIS. Joshua Landis, the French and the Americans, their leaders are going to be sitting again together in Ankara on Tuesday. They're still in that coalition against ISIS. Where does that leave the Kurds today?
Well, the Kurds have taken it on both cheeks. They've been pushed out. The SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, have been pushed out of Syria largely and are in shambles today. So, as you said, Sharaa has been able to consolidate power. Where he has not been able to consolidate power is in the south, where Israel is projecting its power, has captured a bunch of Syrian territory, and has allied himself with the Druze of Syria, a small minority of 3% of the population. And that brings us to Macron's visit, because Sharaa really needs France, and he needs Europe to provide him with some leverage against Israel. He can make peace with Israel and give up the Golan Heights, but he cannot give up this new territory taken by Israel. And he needs leverage. He doesn't have any today, but he's going to need help rebuilding his military. If he focuses on Turkey, Israel is going to say, you see, it's really no Syria, it's just a Turkish army on our border, and Turkey's the new Iran. So, and America, which could do the job, doesn't really have enough leverage with Israel and hasn't really pressured Israel to withdraw either from Lebanon or from Syria. France leading Europe, could provide some kind of leverage and the military buildup, the military relationship that could be built in the future to help him in the UN and help him militarily get some leverage against Israel.
So do you expect, Rina Bassis, listening to what Joshua Landis just said, Emmanuel Macron, fresh off the plane now from Damascus to Ankara, putting a word in Donald Trump's ear, telling him, hey, can you lean on the Israelis to please push back more towards their own border, please?
He might say that. I'm not sure that France has any much leverage here. And as Josh said, the Israelis are already considering that Turkey is on the border. But let me say something about the French involvement, because we have seen at the time when al-Sharaa and the Kurds with the Americans, when they reached an agreement, the French told me, several French sources told me, we were the one protecting the Kurds, pushing for this agreement to preserve some of the rights of the Kurds. But when you look at this document, I mean, the Kurds lost. And this is exactly what Joshua said. This was not a good agreement for the Kurds. As for the Druze, I mean, from the very beginning, from the moment that the Assad regime fell and al-Sharaa came in his stead, France abandoned the Druze. This has to be said very clearly. And they continue with this.
How so?
They continue. They never stood up. They never said, you know, if you continue to attack the Druze, and we have seen the clashes, you remember at the time when Israel entered to help the Druze, I mean, the European and the French reactions were very, very minimal. Just, you know, lip service to say it's not good that you are killing Druze, but they did not really stand to protect them. So for the French, of course, the Kurds, it's something else. There is the whole issue of, you know, against the jihadists in the north and the camps with French jihadists, that they were supposedly, you know, that was a French interest. But even that, I mean, the French did not go all the way. The Druze, they are not interested in. What is interesting, what the French want is to consolidate the statue of al-Sharaa, because for them, maybe they're right. For them, that's the only way to guarantee stability for Syria and stability for the region. And this is what he's going to say to President Trump in Turkey.
Okay, the last French president before Emmanuel Macron today to visit Damascus was in 2009. Nicolas Sarkozy, going after inviting Bachar Al-Assad. The previous year, 2008, guest of honor, the Bastille Day Parade. This is for France's national holiday. Lina, show off. When you look back at those images, I know it seems like a million years ago. There's Hosni Mubarak as well. You can see him in those images. Lina, show off. Again, the stature of France today compared to the stature of France then.
I think it's, as I said before, it's a long history between France and Syria. And as we know, like this culture and like everything economically, it's since long time. You know that in our school, they teach French language. It changed step by step by Assad regime. When Bashar al-Assad took over, like he changed a lot. He changed to English, to Russia language in school. So it's, I think it's as I said, it's a long history, and it's. I just want to mention, you said something about civil war, and I just want to correct always, it was not a civil war. It started as uprising, if we say this, and it's like changed a little bit. As we discussed in this episode today, it's changed to a war. It's all the big country fight there, and all the big country has interest in Syria, and not only in Syria, in Levant.
All right.
Country.
It's not just about one country. Lina Shawaf, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Bordeaux. Joshua Landis from Vermont, from Granville. Arash Azizi in New York. Rina Bassis, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.